Let's apply some of Lightroom's darkroom module controls to this landscape and see if we can make it better. I'm going to follow a fairly standard procedure here. I'm going to start over here in the right panel. I'm going to select the graduated filter. I can see that the sky could use some darkening. I'll choose exposure from the effects pop-up menu, and I'm going to make this value right about there, 2.4. I can change that at any time. Hold down the Shift key, click and drag, and that's going to give me a nice gradual darkening of my sky, makes it more intense. Get that about right. Down a little bit farther, right there. And I can come in and tweak this exposure anytime, as long as this graduate filter is selected. And you can tell it is by the little black dot there. Okay, once I get that about right, I'm going to click on the graduate filter icon and now work my way down to the basic pane. I'd like to play around with the white balance presets and just see what effect that has on the image. So you can see I'm cycling through, trying different settings. Cloudy is warming up the scene. Shade will warm it up even more. Well, I know tungsten and fluorescent won't do anything attractive. In this case here, as shot, it's a little bit cool, but that's appropriate for this image. It looked pretty good. You can see by the histogram, we have a nice even distribution of tonal values. I tend to almost always bump up the black slider a bit, move that black clipping point just to give it a little bit more depth and contrast. I'm getting some clipping now, which you can tell when I hold my cursor over this triangle up at the top here. Now the areas that are blue, that just tells me that that area, the shadow area, that doesn't have any detail in it, but that doesn't bother me, so I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to also move the clarity slider, which is something I oftentimes use. And oftentimes the effect is not as noticeable on the monitor, but it certainly will be when you go to print. If I enlarge this, you'll be able to see better the transition areas here between the fog and the trees. I'll move that clarity back down. And then, okay, now let me move that up again. You can see how it's increasing the contrast there, which is actually a good thing. So going on down, this is really a very straightforward task here. I'm not going to do anything with the tone curve, this tone curve here, or the point curve, because as I said, I'm happy with my exposure values. I can see I don't need to do much there. Work out my way down, nothing here. Detail, this is where I'd sharpen the image. I'm not going to do any sharpening. I don't think I need any, and I kind of wait till the end on sharpening anyway. So move on down. Let's see, how about under lens corrections? I can enable profile corrections, and this automatically senses the type of lens I used, the 70 to 200. And went ahead and compensated for any kind of distortion for that lens. I am noticing that there's a little bit of vignetting on the edges here, so I'm going to move this slider over. Let me go to the extreme so you can see what that's doing to the edges. This is darkening the edges, but I want to go the other way because it looks like the lens darkened the edges a little bit anyway. So I'm going to go about there, so I don't want vignetting on the edge, so that got rid of the vignetting. All right, so I'll move my way down. Nothing there. I don't want to add any grain. I'm not going to do any vignetting. So this camera calibration, this is something that a lot of people forget, but I find it useful to see what different profiles. This is not process because I'm using the latest Adobe process, 2010. I'm pretty happy with the way that's rendering the color, and certainly the noise reduction is extraordinary. But here under Profile, Adobe Standard is how I set it for the default, but the other settings you see here are settings that are specific to the Nikon format. If you have a Canon, there'll be different profiles that appear here, but I like to cycle my way through them and just see what kind of effect I get with these different profiles. Camera Standard, Portrait, Neutral, and finally Landscape. And in fact, I actually like what Landscape profile is doing, so I'm going to go ahead and just keep that setting right there. Okay, now let's go and compare. I'm going to go compare mode, and I'm going to use the tab key to get rid of my panels on the left and right, and I'll use the L key to dim the lights so I can get a good look at the two versions. And I'm much happier with the version on the right, which I've applied all those settings to. So let's go back and hit the L key again, get our panels back, and I'm going to go back just to the single loop mode. Because I approach landscape work very similarly to music, in the sense that one day I may feel like music that is kind of loud and boisterous, and the next day I want something a little bit more subtle and soft. In other words, it's an emotional experience for me, and when I'm working these sliders and looking at the results on the screen, I'm very much aware that one day my feelings may change and I may want to apply a different look to the same image. That's why there's a couple things that I do. I oftentimes will make a snapshot, and I'll give the snapshot maybe version 1, or come up with a better way of describing that image, and I can make as many snapshots as I want. I can also come back and look at the history and see what I've done to it, and get a sense of the image through the history pane. I can also create a virtual copy. I'm right-clicking, create virtual copy, and then I can make as many copies as I want, always having the original to go back to and compare with. The point I'm trying to make here is that this is really a creative process, and Lightroom just makes it so easy to express yourself the way you want to.